Hey everyone, how's it going? Matthew Bailey here, and welcome finally to my top 5 worst films of 2020. Now, before I get into it, I do want to point out, if you notice something different about me in this video, it's the fact that I am now wearing a hat in this video, and that is because this will be the first video in a long line of videos for the foreseeable future where I will be wearing this hat in videos, which is sort of trying something new. And like I said, going back to the main topic, I know this year has been pretty crappy due to the whole situation with the pandemic. I'm not going to actually say the word because I know some people get hammered on for saying that. But there were I was able to get enough films to have at least a top 5 worst with 2 dishonorable mentions. And so before I get into the main 5, let me talk about those dishonorable mentions. And those are The Croods 2 and the Netflix original movie The Babysitter Killer Queen, which is the sequel to 2017's The Babysitter. And yet, even though I did not do any reviews on these 2 movies, I still thought that they were okay, not as bad movies as the main 5 that are going to be on this list. So that's why you didn't see any reviews on them, because they were dishonorable mentions. And that's why I didn't do any reviews on them, because they weren't that great either. But with that out of the way, let's get started with the top 5 worst films of 2020. So, as you can see to this side of me, the one and only Ivan is at my number 5 spot. Now, if I accidentally did give this movie a good review, I actually feel like I should take that back, because there were a lot of other films that got released this year that I really enjoyed, and this one, even though it is kind of based on a somewhat true story, I don't think it deserves to be on the top best films of the year, because, like I said, it mostly involved talking animals, and we all know that doesn't really work well, especially in live action form. So, at least not for all movies. Some movies that involve live action animals talking are okay, like The Lion King, but this one is not the same, in the same boat. Like I said, this movie, I think it was also based on some kind of book, and that I never read, and that's why when I saw this movie, I was going in there with a blank slate, and that's probably why I didn't really enjoy this film as much as I probably said I did in the actual review. So, as for number 5, that is the one and only Ivan. Yep, Trolls World Tour is at my number 4 spot. Now, I mean, you knew that this was going to make it somewhere on the list. And, however, I will say that this movie was not as bad as the first Trolls movie. I will say that. Sure, I didn't really enjoy the fact that they created this sequel. And to be completely honest, this movie actually did not come out in theaters. It actually came out straight on demand. And it still made a hefty amount of money, somehow. But I think the main reason why the first movie failed so much was because of the Bergen characters being in the movie. And spoiler warning if y'all have not seen Trolls World Tour yet, but the Bergen, specifically the 2 main younger Bergens that were in the first film, the Prince and the Handmaiden, they do not show up in this movie. They are the only 2 that show up in the sequel, but it's at the very end, like right as the credits are about to roll, which is why I think this movie did a little bit better than the first one, because of them not really appearing and having some major roles. However, I still think this movie was not a great film, even though it was a good musical, good combination of musical songs and talking about the differences between different types of music, whether that's country, rock, classical, all that type of stuff. I still think it did not do a very good job with storytelling, especially because, again, it's based off of a toy brand that really does not look anything like they do in the movie. So I have to say this movie definitely didn't do it for me this year, so for that reason I'm going to go with Trolls World Tour as my number 4. Yep, unfortunately, even though it stars Robert Downey Jr., DOLITTLE is at my number 3 spot, and I have a feeling my good friend Matthew Davis Media is going to have this on his worst films of the year list, but DOLITTLE was, I gotta say, if I had to choose between this DOLITTLE movie and the original 2 DOLITTLE movies that had Eddie Murphy in them, I feel like this one is just a teensy bit better than those films, but it's not a great film. I feel like the way they did this story was just a tiny bit better than the original 2 DOLITTLE films that had Eddie Murphy in them. But I still don't think it was a good, like I said, not good storytelling. And for this to be the next movie that Robert Downey Jr. did right after Endgame, like not too far past his appearance in Endgame, I have a feeling that this movie could have possibly hurt his career for at least other non-MCU related films. Except for maybe something like Sherlock Holmes, which I heard there is supposed to be a 3rd movie to that series, which he does star in, but I gotta say, this movie was, because the whole movie kind of basically takes place in London instead of the main suburban USA areas that I think DOLITTLE with Eddie Murphy took place in. But yeah, it's not a great film. And let's just hope that the next movie project that Robert Downey Jr. shows up in that's not MCU related is a little bit better than this one. But anyways, for number 3, I have DOLITTLE. Now, as for my number 2 movie, this is a movie I actually went to see with my good friend Matthew Davis Media, and that was Bloodshot. Unfortunately, we both agreed that Bloodshot was not a great film, and especially with Vin Diesel being in the movie, like, I really did not understand, like, what this movie was about. Like I said, I went, again, just like the one and only Ivan, I went into this movie with no clue as to what it was based on, or if it was based on anything, and I really didn't like the way it turned out. And, however, there is my number 1 movie I can explain why this movie did not fall into that category, and why the number 1 movie actually deserves to be in that spot. But, I mean, what movie could have possibly have been worse to me than Bloodshot? Well, you're about to find out. Yep. You guessed it. The only other movie that was not so good this year was ARTEMIS FOWL. I can't believe that this movie, even though it was by Disney, they really did not do this film justice. I mean, it is based off of a classic book franchise that I've never really read the books, but I know that the premise of these books were basically a spy thriller, sort of magical fantasies type adventure, but if I have a hunch, if I have read the first book, I have a feeling that most of the action would have actually taken place in the second and third acts of the film. The second and third acts of the film, but this movie basically didn't have an actual action sequence appear until the third act of the film. So basically the first 2 acts were just normal scenes and not really much action or violence. And I was just like, are they for real? Which is why I am kind of glad that they decided not to release this movie in theaters. They were going to, but then they decided to release it on Disney Plus back in June this year. Which I am thankful for, because I guarantee you the movie would have flopped at the box office had they kept it in theaters. Which is why it is on my number 1 spot. And now for a little bit of a closing statement. So yeah, like I said, this year has been pretty crazy for movies. However, I was able to see 5 movies that were not so great, and at least 2 movies that were dishonorable mentions that I thought were not great, but okay movies. And like I said, The Croods 2, I actually just saw back in November, around Thanksgiving, and the other dishonorable mention I had on here, The Babysitter Killer Queen, that was released, I think, during the month of Halloween. So those are both recent films that I've seen. But I waited until I waited at least a month after I saw The Croods 2 to be fully sure that this is the list I wanted for my worst films of the year list in 2020. So anyways, that's all for now in this video, and like I said, I will be wearing this hat in future videos, with this one being the first. So anyways, that's all for now, and I will see all you dudes in the next video.